pause. It's doing it now. It's always live streaming way before it tells me it is. So it's probably live streaming now. Pause. Doing it. Yep, it is. Okay, okay, let me share it real quick. Copy. Yep, and I got the notice, so it's live. Okay. All right, so let me get this smaller so I can see the chat. Yep, we got some people on already. Hi, guys. As you can see, I did not say anything about this. I just touched base with Mrs. Sarah, today earlier. So I have a guest with me, Mrs. Sarah Wallis. Many of you know her. I've had her on before. Go ahead and introduce yourself again. We have a lot of new subscribers, so let people know who you are, your background, who you work with.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Sarah Wallis. I'm a registered nurse. I'm a bachelor's in the science of nursing, so that makes me that much more intelligent. I did 5 years of mental health nursing. I worked in a psychiatric hospital with adolescents and children predominantly. And then I phased over to home health nursing, and I specialize in hospice. So I've been doing hospice for about 3 years now.
Okay. And yeah, we have talked about a lot of different things during the COVID, stuff. I've talked with her about just how COVID changed things. But today we came up with a subject. I know I've actually had some women that have talked about it before in Gently Led Sisters. So I thought it would be, Sarah actually reached out to me with this topic suggestion. It's a good one. But what to do when you become in charge of your parents' well-being. Basically, you become your parents' caregiver. So I've never experienced this myself, but I have watched my mom go through this. And I think she was a really good example to me. And then also we were going to talk about too, the transition of what happens if it comes to the point where you have to put your parent in, a facility to be cared for, what is just too much for you. So, but let's go right into it. So I know we were going to talk about where you want to start.
Well, I want to first say just kind of a disclaimer. As we get into this, I'm going to just assume we're talking about mom. Mm-hmm. That's not to say that this doesn't also apply to dad, but more often than not, it's mom that's the issue. One, because women are more likely to outlive their spouses when they get into the older years, and also because men naturally are the providers and the spiritual leaders of the home. So if they pass before their spouse, a lot of times the woman's left kind of lost and disoriented as far as guidance and what to do. Like they've never seen their own checking account, especially with this older generation that we're going through now. So it's more likely percentage wise that we would be dealing with mom more than dad. So I don't want anyone to think that it doesn't apply to dad as well. But so that was just something I wanted to make sure to bring across. It's just easier to just talk about one. So, but
that's very interesting too, because that's what it was with my mom, was my grandma, because my grandpa had passed. He had colon cancer and he had passed earlier, years before, and then she developed Alzheimer's. So she was no longer in a state to care for herself. So my mom took her in her home for a year or two, quite a while, cared for her, bathed her, took her to the bathroom, fed her, everything. And then when it got to be too much for my mom, she had to put her in a home for the last few months of her life. But so that's kind of my background with it. Now, have you personally, you haven't gotten to this point yet?
Not with my mom. No, actually, my mom is caring for my grandmother. So it's okay. My grandmother has kind of gotten to this point. Now, it's something that I've thought of, though. When we were looking for a permanent home, both of my brothers live out of state. So I realized that I would probably be the one to take on that role. And that's not something that I don't know if everyone often thinks of readily, but I realized I'd have to stay close by. So I got a house only a couple blocks from where she lives, so that it would be easier for her to stay independent longer when she gets to that point. But that was not the forefront of my mind, but a consideration when choosing a home. And I think that that's something that, whether you're an only child or whether you have siblings, someone has to start thinking about the responsibility of that. Even though she's only in her 60s, 20 years from now, it's definitely going to be a real factor, and we'll have already established our roots by then. So I didn't want to have to uproot her or myself. It was easier to stay close to her now.
I love it that you say that, because we actually, and I know you're watching, we have a couple at our church. The reason that they moved back to this area was for that specific reason. And it's why they come to our church, because they were close to his dad, his parents. And, they are only a few blocks away, and they check in. He's still independent. They check in on him pretty much every day though. And, they know that they'll be the ones, taking care of his care. And I think that's a way to honor your parents. I feel like they're doing a very, very good job of honoring, their parents by putting that forefront in their decisions, why they decided to move back here versus staying where they were a couple hours away. So,
well, it's difficult, that first initial transition, when to decide that it's time to take control, for both people, because your parents are used to being strong for you. They've spent their whole lives being the rock that you can lean on. So they're giving up and grieving for themselves, the loss of themselves, when they get to the point that they cannot provide that sort of support to you anymore. So they might let it go on longer than it's safe to. And this is why we often have elderly falling in the home, because they should have asked for help way sooner. And there's certain aspects that would attribute to the thought of when it's time to take control. Either it's an obvious situation or a not so obvious situation. So an obvious situation would be if mom falls and breaks her hip. Well, obviously she can't really care for herself that well if she's falling like that in her home. So then it's time to take control. Now, what that level of control means is subjective to the situation, whether that means she moves in with you or you go visit her every day, get her out of bed, whether she needs caretakers. There's a lot of options and tiers of control, but falling is usually not usually, but it's often a point in time when you get that reality check, when it's like, okay, now it's time that we need to step up. For both parent and child, the parents often have to kind of relent at that point, that they're not really able to care for themselves as much as they could.
right.
A situation that might not be so obvious though is not like if they're not eating properly, they'll hide it. A lot of times they hide what they're incapable of doing because they don't want to be a burden. That's the big thing, especially with this boomer generation, the older boomer generation. Being a burden is like the worst thing you could be. It's akin to sin. You don't want to be a burden. So they'll do anything they can to be labeled that, be labeled a burden. So they'll hide the things that they aren't capable of. So you might notice subtleties like, oh, mom, you look a little thinner, and she'll say, oh, I've just been exercising, or I'm just not hungry lately. And so it's so easy to brush that off, like, oh, she is in control, she knows what she's doing. But in truth, she might not be remembering to eat, or might not have the strength to stand long enough to cook herself something, or might not have the willpower to eat. There might be depression going on, because it is definitely more than just accepting that you're not what you used to be. It is grieving for the loss of your life. It's almost like you're grieving as though you've died, like you're grieving for your own death, because you're no longer independent. You're no longer who you once were. It's the same as if somebody loses a limb or goes through some sort of traumatic event that they are forever changed by. There's a level of grief involved. But, and another thing, eating is one of the big things that they forget to eat, or they start to lose weight. And the other thing is finances. That's a huge problem. I think that more than anything is when you realize it's time to step in, when they're, sending $5,000 to that prince in Africa, or they're getting new cars that they don't even know how to driving too is another one, but that you can kind of work around if they just aren't capable of driving anymore. They could still be independent, but buying a new car or buying a whole new set of furniture, he's like, why are you doing this when you're 85? It's just certain things that or if they're giving money to family members, that's a hairy area. Like grandchildren are coming in, circling around and getting checks written for them. And so that finances is another, it's a prideful thing more than being the fear of being a burden. When you excuse me, when you take over the finances, it's more pride that they're losing their pride, they're losing control of that. That's a huge issue as well for them. So it's definitely requires some finesse, time, and patience.
Right. I know Sarah said in the chat, with my grandma, it's been forgetting to bathe. It was noticeable that something was wrong.
Yeah. Or like not changing Depends, not changing soiled diapers, not throwing them out, piling them. I don't know. I love the show Hoarders, but so many times in Hoarders, it's because there's an elderly person that has family members that just are not seeing the signs, and they hide it so well. And then they come into the home and they're crying like, I had no idea she was like this. And you have this bathroom full of dirty diapers. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is how they hide it. So
wow. What about medications too? Now, when they get to the point where they're not taking the medications they need for, like, say, blood pressure or heart problems or something, is that a warning sign as well? Or
yeah, that's another thing that can, kind of like with driving, that can be worked around. More so, I mean, not taking medications, you could set alarms to go off to remind them, because it's more that they forget. It's not that they're willfully doing that. The other problem is mixing them up. I knew a family, a husband and wife, that the wife filled their pill boxes every week and somehow mixed up their heart medications, gave him hers and gave hers his, and they both had a stroke within a small stroke, but they both had a stroke within a couple days of each other because she mixed up the medication. So, but they have, not only is there pill boxes, and I know that's kind of like still gives them a level of control, because they have to be able to know what day it is, day, morning, evening, and be mindful to take them out of the box. But they make pill boxes that are locked, that you can only turn it to the day and time, like you can only turn it to the evening on this day and open that drawer to take those meds. So you can really make it so that they have no access to medication in the home except what's in this locked pill box that only opens on the specific times that they're prescribed their meds. So you can program it to do that. So technology has made it a little bit easier for us to be able to control that without having to pull them out of the home or put them in a situation where they have to have a nurse oversee it. But yeah, so that the other thing is services that are available. And I don't know if we want to get into that right now, but that's a whole other animal. But you can get and all this stuff is specific to the state. So you'd have to almost go to area of aging in your local state to see what's available for the elderly. But I know in my state, they have a program that's actually state funded, where they allow nurses to come so many hours a day, depending on the need, but they could come just 1 hour a day and make sure that the patient takes her meds, or make sure she's her med box is full. They might come once a week to just fill up the Medi planner. But that's more for people. I mean, that's beneficial for people that don't have support. But I feel like these are things that easily the family could take control of. And the more the family's involved, I think it brings a closer bond. It changes the relationship that you have with your mother. I mean, there's no denying that. It changes how you perceive her, because she's no longer the rock you can count on. Like, you need to care for her. So she's very vulnerable and weak and precious. But to deny yourself that ability to spend that time with her because of pride and the hurdles of respect and feeling that this is what she would want, I feel like you lose a lot of a relationship that you could grow and gain if you deny yourself that time.
I know that there is a book, I need to look it up and try to link to it, about a mom, a daughter that took over for her mom's care when her mom got Alzheimer's. And it's a really, I can't remember if I read it, or I think I might have read it, but she talks about the whole journey and how their relationship changed, but all of the special things that happened, as she started caring for her mom with this Alzheimer's and different things like that. But I remember with my mom, I know I was telling you before we started, I just feel like when the roles switched and my mom started caring for my grandma, it was like my grandma was just an oversized, newborn again, or adult sized newborn, and so it was very, very exhausting for my mom. But I know now, looking back, my mom's really happy that she did take over her care for so long, because I don't know, it was just, do you think it's easier for kids to take over their parents' care versus putting them in a home, right away?
Well, no, I don't think it's easier, because putting them in a home, I mean, all you have to do is visit every Sunday and not really think about it beyond that. I think, though, and these are strong words, Cassandra, but I think we have a responsibility
Oh, yes.
as the child of our parents to care for them, whether it's easy or not. And I mean, what I talked to up to this point is kind of like that early signs of transition, those early moments where it's like, okay, it's time to step in, it's time to take control. And you're referring to the later times when there's nothing they can do for themselves. They're completely dependent. And they're in bed and you're rolling them and you're bathing them and you're checking their wounds. And that can be very burdensome on someone, especially someone that might have young children in the home still and they're caring for their elderly parent or grandparent. That especially can be taxing, because you're getting it on both ends, day and night, especially and then you throw in like behavioral things, because you're responsible for changing their diapers, feeding them, but also for their behaviors and their actions. So if they're hitting, biting, pinching, these are things that make it kind of like a thankless job that you have to be in charge of. Now, that being said, I often say to my children, the more that I have of them, the more they can share the burden of taking care of me, because I expect them to do that. That's my retirement plan. They are. But I think, and this is the problem that my mother's having with my grandmother, is she doesn't know when to ask for help. She tries to take all the responsibility onto herself. She was a manager in a nursing home, a dietary manager, before retiring. So she's used to being in charge and just doing everything herself. And that's well and good, but she definitely gets fatigued, and it changes the love that she might have for my grandmother, having to deal with the drama every day, because my grandmother's a very emotional person. She has Parkinson's. She's grieving, like I told you about grieving. She's grieving every day about the loss of her mind. She's forgetting, and she can't remember that she grieved the day before about the exact same thing. So it can just be, you go over the same stuff over and over again, and it can be so annoying, to put it lightly, that she doesn't know when to ask for help. And I mean, she might ask for help and not receive it, and then just give up and not ask for any more help. So it's really important to divide that responsibility because it isn't easy, like to answer your question, it's so much easier to have them in a nursing home, but it's also so much easier for the family to check out. Like you might put mom in a nursing home and then brother in California never talks to her again. Whereas if you say to the family, okay, she's coming to live with me, but I need all of you to donate some of your time,
Right.
then and set up a schedule, then it's not going to be such a burden on you. And it might be something as simple as, like with my grandmother, they decided to let her stay in her home. This all happened because my grandfather passed, and he was basically, after the kids all grew up and the grandkids all grew up, he was everything that she had. I mean, her whole role in life was caring for him and her family. And now nobody needs her anymore. So all she thinks is she's just a burden. Again, that word, but she's a burden on everybody, and she just wishes she could just die. That's what she says all the time. So they decided to keep her in the home that she spent her whole life since she was 18 and married her husband. They lived there. And she wanted to stay there. She said, I'm just going to stay here till I die. So, okay. So my mom takes care of her and gets assistance from my aunt. And then the brothers, all her brothers, my uncles, maintain the yard because she lives in a farmhouse. So they mow, they do maintenance on the house, these other things. So even if you're not dividing the role of immediate caretaker, these other roles, as long as they're being assigned. And if you're an only child, God bless you. But there's also like services, like I said, through area of aging, services that can get, or out of pocket, depending on her financial state. But you can purchase like visiting aides to come into the home a couple hours a day, even just to give you some time off. Or you can set up through area of aging for respite. So even though if you make the decision to not have her go into assisted living or a nursing home, that you're trying to take care of her in the home, you could still have her go away for a week just so you could go on vacation. And if you don't have siblings that can come in and watch her for that week that you want to go away, you could have her go into a facility. But I feel in truth, especially with dementia and Alzheimer's, they thrive better in the home.
Oh yeah.
There's studies have shown that your mental faculties retain longer if you actively are exercised every day, which is something that never happens in a nursing home or in assisted living. But you're just putting grandma on the exercise bike once a day, or mom, might make a difference to help keep her mental state intact for a little longer.
Well, I love what you said about it being your responsibility, because I firmly believe that as well, that we need to take care. Our parents did so much for us and took care of us for so long that we need to take care of them rather than just sticking them in a home. I feel as if, and we've visited many, many homes because, just being in the ministry, and there's so many that are just forgotten. They stick them in a home. And then we saw what happened during COVID. We had governors sticking COVID patients in nursing homes because they ran out of room in hospitals or whatever. And then the whole nursing, how many elderly died in nursing homes because, there was just spreading everywhere. So, there's no care for the elderly like you as their child can provide for them. So I definitely see the importance of taking over their care. But I do like the option where you're talking about now. Is your mom there every single day with your grandma, like during the day?
She gets her up in the morning and then stays until 2. And then somebody else comes in the evening to make sure she eats dinner. She makes her dinner, and then my grandma's supposed to heat it up and eat it, but a lot of times she forgets or she doesn't have the desire to. So someone comes and makes sure she heats it up and eats her dinner. But other than that, she's in the evening, she's by herself. So my mom's with her from every day, 10 to 2, Monday through Friday.
Wow, that's a lot. Her life is kind of on hold right now while she's taking care of your grandma.
Well, and I know that with facilities, I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because some people either think a nursing home, they have this idea of a nursing home being like horror movie-esque, where people are just like laying on the floor, dead for 2 weeks and nobody notices.
Right.
or they think that that's the stuff you see on the commercials where there's the beautiful smiling nurse leaning over mom, offering her a drink as she's sitting in this beautiful, plant infested common area with a gleaming smile on her face. And it's kind of somewhere in the middle. Now, there's assisted living, which is one step up from a nursing home. It's basically someone who's able to get around, but they need someone to help them with their medications, and they go to a dining hall to get fed. So they don't have any type of responsibilities like that. They could even have someone come in and bathe them in the morning to help them get dressed in the morning. And then if anything goes wrong, there's a nursing staff on hand that can kind of get them to the hospital or get them up if they've fallen. So they have somebody supervising them. So assisted living is the ideal if you have to place them anywhere. However, they usually cost entry level $3,000 a month.
Wow.
So depending on your parents' resources, that can be depleted rather quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Nursing homes are based on income.
Mm-hmm.
So her mom's whole Social Security goes to the nursing home. They look at how much the Social Security is, and they take the entire amount to place her. So that basically covers the cost of placement. But usually, and what you're going to see is she's going to be placed in a room with 3 other people. The amount of square footage that you would say is specifically hers is probably 10 by 15 feet.
Wow.
So it's a very small space.
Mm-hmm.
There's a curtain that divides them. And then you might have just enough room to put a small, like 19-inch television.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them don't even have televisions. I think maybe 10% of the nursing home population has televisions. Most of them just kind of lay in bed all day, or they'll put them in a wheelchair or what's called a Broda chair. It's kind of a reclining wheelchair, and they'll wheel them out into the hallway and just sit them so they can keep an eye on them.
Right.
But there's really nothing for them to do. So they just sleep because there's no stimulation. So if you have somebody who has dementia, their brain is depleting, it's shrinking. They're losing their memory. They're losing their functional faculties. The worst thing you can do is stick them in a chair and put them in a hallway and don't engage with them.
Right.
Because they very quickly lose all ability to engage back. So they decline they have, I don't say everyone, but they have the potential of declining rather quickly, as opposed to having them in a home setting where you can set up a regimen. You can talk with them every day. You can show them pictures like a lot of times they do photo books to remind people of who their family is, stuff like that to keep them engaged. That helps them stay with us longer. Because when their brain declines, they usually, I think it's pneumonia that usually takes them, but they lose the ability to swallow. So they choke a lot. They have to have pureed food. All these things happen because they're not being cared for as well as they could by people that love them. They're being given the basic levels of care, but not the level of care that you would want your mom to have.
Right. Exactly. And I think every different scenario that you're talking about as far as nursing home assisted living, I will say that the cream of the crop is definitely the assisted living places, the assisted living facilities. In fact, when we go to one here in town, they get mad if we call it a nursing home. They're like, well, this is not a nursing home. Stop calling it that, So most of them are still fully aware of what's going on. They have different activities and things for them to do. They have their own little apartment. It's actually a little apartment, but there's someone there on call, to help if they need help. So
yeah,
very interesting. So when it comes to, I know the next thing is, you talked about seeking help from others. I like the system that your family has in place. I think that's good because it has everyone helping out. That's so much easier than, just one person doing it or, whatever. So I think Good. But let's talk a little bit about when you switch from that child role to the parent role with your parents, and, the transition and just what that looks like,
Well, there's so many people that I find in hospice. So there are times in hospice that when they get on to hospice services, their decline's rather sudden.
Mhm.
And the family doesn't want to do basic care because they're so uncomfortable seeing their mom or dad naked. So they don't want to change their briefs, or they'll make like it's especially a daughter and father situation.
I could definitely see that.
Yeah, daughter father is a big issue. Daughter mother's not so much of an issue, but they'll often get their spouses to take over that role because they don't want to see their parent that way. So it's getting the point of acceptance, that loving the memory of who your mom used to be, but accepting the role of how you are with your mom now as a different, you have to think of it more of like a job. And get out of your mind, get out of that mind game, because she's already going to be in it saying, oh, I wish I could just die. I'm such a burden on you. I mean, you're going to hear it all the time. So the more that you're uncomfortable with it, it's going to make her feel more guilty that you're having to go through it.
Right.
Oddly, the thing that people are most uncomfortable about are suppositories. Nobody wants to put a suppository up their parents' butt.
Yeah,
they always tell me I have to go out in the middle of the night to put suppositories in people because they don't want to do it.
I could see this would be super hard for me to get over too, because there's always that line there, just that modesty thing that you don't cross. I mean, think about it. When you're growing up, you get to the age where you're like, Mom, stay out, I'm getting dressed, and there's always that barrier there. So I could see it would be tough for me. I know, maybe it's different. Maybe it will be different for you if you ever get put in this situation because you're around that all the time. I don't know. Do you think it'll be different for you?
Yeah, it'll be different for me.
Yeah, because you're
I've done it so
all
much.
the time. Normal people like me are not. Not normal, but people that aren't nurses,
Yeah.
or people that don't deal with hospice patients. So yeah, I don't know. I could see.
Another thing that's interesting, is something you might not think of, especially with dementia. Now, there's certain stages of, now I say dementia and Alzheimer's, they're kind of the same as far as their progression, but the earlier stages are the hiding stage where they hide their problem. They're good at lying and kind of trickery to make you think they're normal. And you have to spend a lot of time with them to realize that something's off.
Right.
That's a difficult stage because they don't want to believe that there's anything wrong with them. And so their own mind, they get paranoid, that people are kind of out to put it. They want to get, they say, my family's just trying to lock me up. They don't realize that there's something wrong with them. But then as they get more progressed, they might be functional physically, but mentally, as their mind deteriorates, a lot of times you see the worst aspects of them magnified. So like with a woman, she might end up crying all the time. And it's like her vulnerability that she was able to suppress her whole life is just kind of out on the surface. Something we see a lot with men in that stage is they become like sexually inappropriate. Like if they were like a flirtatious dad, flirting with the pretty ladies when they were functional, when they become demented, all of a sudden they're, touching people inappropriately and stuff like that. So these are things you might not expect to come across. And so there are obstacles that you think, now what do I do? And you just have to kind of look at resources, especially online. Make sure to be in a good relationship with their doctor, because a lot of times all you really can. I'm not a big advocate for medication, but when they get to the point of being elderly or when they're demented, there's not much psychotherapy you can do anymore. You have to medicate to get them under control sometimes, with stuff like that. So it's something that you don't expect, and it's sometimes hard to make decisions on things like that. Or the decision to put them on hospice. That's a scary concept, because people think as soon as my mom goes on hospice, she's going to die. And there's so many times I've gone to do an admission, and they say, we're not going to say the H word. You're just a nurse. Don't say the H word, because they think it's going to change everything if if mom knows she's on hospice. But we've had people in hospice for years. So it's not like we only step in when they only have weeks to live. Usually they say the rule of thumb is 6 months.
Okay.
If it looks like they're probably going to pass in 6 months, but that doesn't mean they have to. And if they don't, we continue on with them. We had one lady for 2.5 years before she eventually passed. So, but that's a helpful resource when you're over your head. So again, there's always stuff out there to kind of help you with that, but it's not something you really think about when you first get into it. So a lot of times you come across these stumbling blocks, or complicated wounds, swallowing difficulties if they're choking all the time, or stop eating if they could just completely stop eating. And these are hurdles that you have to say, okay, now what? And just kind of reevaluate. And it's good to fall back on a support system when that happens.
Let's talk about dementia for a minute. What are some early signs? And then someone also asked a question, what are some ways, or are there any ways in addition to exercise, to help prevent dementia? Is there anything?
Well, there's a lot of theories, kind of like with cancer. Everything causes cancer.
Right.
Like I know a big one is metal fillings. They've linked the mercury and metal fillings to dementia.
I have some metal fillings. That creeps me out. I think I have two. I have two metal fillings.
Yeah, because a lot of the elderly, you look in their mouth and it's like all metal, in there. They have a lot of metal fillings. Yeah. And I don't know if it's so much now the contents of what they use now, but what the dentistry used in the past had mercury in it, and that was linked to dementia. Preventative wise, I don't know. If you talk to our lovely friend Paul Wittenberger, he'd probably say diet. And that is definitely, there's a lot of research about that. Diet can influence everything. I know it can influence mental health, but how you absorb things, what you're absorbing, especially processed foods, like a natural food diet is, I mean, I'm kind of hypocritical because I love a McDonald's iced coffee, but the less processed food you eat, the better off that you are in all aspects, including your mental health. Oxygen, making sure you're getting enough oxygen to the brain. So, I mean, you and I don't have this issue, but somebody who might have a COPD, some sort of oxygen, like some sort of respiratory issue, if they're non-compliant with their oxygen, I don't know if you ever see that when they put that little thing on your finger, and it comes up with a percentage, your oxygen saturation. That's that percentage is the amount of oxygen that is able to be detected in your blood. So your blood's role is the blood comes up to the lungs and it grabs oxygen through the areola in the lungs and transports it out to the different organs of the body, and then it comes back and repeats the cycle. That's why they say that your blood is blue. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
Yeah, I've heard that.
It's red when it is oxygenated, and then it turns blue when the oxygen's out. That's why, like, your blue veins and stuff.
Yep.
And then, but whenever you cut, it's red because as soon as it hits the oxygen in the air.
Right.
So anyway, so if the oxygen saturation is low, that means that there's not enough oxygen being perfused through the lungs into the bloodstream. That means your organs aren't getting enough oxygen. So that's going to affect all of your organs, but especially your brain. Like your brain you can start hallucinating, get confused, disoriented. And over time, even just a smaller amount, like they expect your oxygen to be around 98% in a healthy person. So if somebody's at 90%, they're just slightly depleted in their oxygen saturation. Over time, that can certainly influence your brain function long term. So I'm not saying necessarily that there's ties to dementia with that. I don't know if anything's been everything's all like studies have shown. There's no solid evidence in the medical field, honestly, of anything. You could argue against gravity if you wanted to. So it's just it seems like there's evidence to the positive that these are things that you can avoid. So diet, making sure that they're compliant with certain their medical advice, medical orders. They do have memantine, Aricept, a bunch of different medications that have been shown to slow the progression of dementia. Nothing can cure it. Nothing can stop it, but you can slow it down. Although I saw a demented lady who her husband got her up every morning at the same time. So he didn't let her lay in bed all day. He got her up in the morning, took her out, had her do exercise on a bike. And they even have those ones that you can sit and it's just the pedals on the floor. So you don't even need to climb them onto a bike. They can just sit on the couch and pedal. But he had her exercise every morning, had her sit outside, which sunlight is such an amazing attribute to your health. So you spent an hour with her sitting outside watching the birds, and they would talk every day about the family. So he would remind her of like, oh, Jack is doing this today. Jack is working in this state here. Anna is with her kids. Her kids are named this and this. So just reminding her over and over again of these names of her family, her kids and grandkids. And she really thrived, considering how progressed her dementia was. She did really well. So consistency, not having them bounce around. Like there's so many times that I saw a patient decline because they moved her room at like a nursing home. She would have a roommate in a room, and then they put her in a different room, or her roommate would die, some sort of change, and that would confuse and upset the routine, and they'd get all confused and disoriented. So with dementia and Alzheimer's, unfortunately, you have really good days and really bad days. But those bad days are more frequent when you're throwing a bunch of wrenches in the work, as opposed to making sure that they have a consistent routine that involves a lot of these health-inducing aspects. So you're never going to fully get rid of the bad days, and they're going to become more and more frequent. But you can prolong it as long as possible by doing certain simple things.
I have a family member that has dementia, early onset dementia. And I've noticed with the diet, one of the things with him is that he will only eat just like 3 things. And one of them is honey buns. He loves his honey buns. And he'll also like mix jelly and peanut butter in a bowl and eat that.
Wow.
And it's just very, very, very limited food. Like it's almost like he's regressed, in his food taste to like a kid again. And then another thing we've noticed with him is that where he used to be a very take charge type of personality, it's kind of reversed. And now he looks at his wife and he'll ask her, like, can I do this or can I do that? It's just so weird to see him.
Yeah, and that probably shows that he was a lot more vulnerable inside than he let on. Because it really does. Dementia brings out the most inner, like, secret part of yourself, because you can't hide it anymore. It becomes like the veil just is pulled back and you see what they really are.
That's interesting. That's kind of sweet, actually.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is really helpful, especially when there's a large family involved, is just communication. Don't rely on mom to be able to tell you what she ate for breakfast. Our family has a notebook that they report everything, what she ate, when she woke up, if she had a bowel movement. So they just have a log in there and they all reference it. As soon as my mom walks in, she looks at the notebook and then she goes about her day. And we use that in practice too, in hospice on occasion, if there's a lot of people involved. So little tips like that, little things like that really can become resourceful. And you end up, I guess, just finding all the life hacks with time and patience. It's so hard the longer you wait, unfortunately, the harder it gets. So if you get to a point that they're just so like we've had situations where children got involved because they found their mom lying on the floor after a day. She fell and was laying there, and just realizing that her whole house is a mess. The fridge is empty, it's trashed. There's pill bottles everywhere that are empty. They just walk into something and they say, what happened? And then you're thrown into it. So it's better to kind of ease yourself in and not procrastinate and say, well, she's still doing okay. Let's see how she goes in another month or two or another year. And, eventually it becomes very overwhelming.
Do you feel like when there's situations that you've seen when the child has had to take over for their parents, do most of the parents seem to fight it?
Yeah, when they're in early dementia, like I talked about, when their mind, they forget. Okay. Because the first thing that goes with dementia is your short-term memory.
Right.
You remember the long-term memory stuff last. So the last thing to go are family members' names and things like that. But the first thing to go is you forget what you had for breakfast. So those are the warning signs. When people ask me, like, what are the early signs of dementia? I always say, short-term memory loss is always the first indicator. After that, it's after the memory loss is behavioral changes, difficulty with sleeping, and difficulty swallowing, are things that might manifest. But that short-term memory loss is definitely a ringer for and also behavioral issues in the evening. Sundowning, I don't know if you've heard that term, but so often dementia patients become more behaviorally active in the evening.
My grandma always did.
More confused in the evening. They need a lot more help in the evening. So that's another symptom. But anyway, so that early in the early stages, they don't understand if there's something wrong with them. You can tell them they have dementia and they say, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm fine. Well, your doctor prescribed, or your doctor diagnosed you with dementia. Well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I want a second opinion. You're just trying to take my rights. So people use that to their advantage. If they're trying to take over people's financial assets, they might get trick them into getting this dementia diagnosis put on them so that they can take over without mom or dad having a say, which is unfortunate. But I think more often than not, I would love to believe that every child has their parents' best interests in mind and not their own personal financial interests in mind. So, but the parents often think that that's the case, that, oh, they're just after my money. They're just trying to take away my freedom. They're just trying to put me away. So it can be really difficult in those early stages because they don't identify they have a problem, even though they do.
Right.
And you cannot tell them. You could talk to them until you're blue in the face and show them all this evidence, and you can show them the brain scans and they'll be like, it's somebody else's. You're just trying to trick me. And they don't want to believe it. They don't want to believe it because in their own head, they think they're fine. They don't understand. And so it takes some time, 6 months later, they are starting to see it themselves, that they know, like my grandma's at that point. She knows that she'll ask a question and my mom will answer it and she'll say, oh, I already asked that. Like she'll remember then that she asked it and I already got the answer. But then 2 minutes later, she asked the question again. So that's when it's unfortunately sad for them. It's really a loss for them when they start to, I would hate to be at that point that I lose my mind.
I know.
I'd rather, if we had a choice of how we die, I would not choose that. But
no,
yeah,
it's
it
fascinating
takes time.
because it's exactly everything that you're saying. It follows the exact pattern that it has with this person and our life that has the early onset dementia. So it's just like that. The first, I'm fine, nothing's wrong with me. Okay, but here's your brain scans. This is what the doctor said. We need a second opinion. I'm fine. But then it's the short-term memory loss. Also, another thing we noticed was living someplace for 25 years and forgetting where things were. They forget where this place was or this place was, forgetting names of family members, forgetting, names of people that you should know, different things like that. So, but yeah.
And then as they advance, as it progresses, I mean, you get to that stage where you see their deepest kind of emotional state, but you almost get to a point where they're completely regressed into infancy,
Right.
where they walk around with baby dolls. A lot of little old ladies love their baby dolls or little kitties. They have little plush kitties they'll walk around with as pets. They'll talk about when's my daddy coming to pick me up, say stuff like that. So they often will put themselves at a place where they're somewhere between 8 and 14. That's usually where we find them. So
It's interesting.
yeah, especially the ladies, more than the gentlemen. The gentlemen are more just pinching butts. They turn into dirty old men.
That's funny. No, Joyce asked a question. She said, how does dementia look different for saved people? I've heard some people say saved people don't get dementia. I don't agree with that. I've never been around a saved person who got dementia. I don't agree with that because I don't think dementia is a spiritual thing. A lot of times it's a physical thing, just something that's going, parts of your brain are dying.
Yeah, I think the thing is, and I mean, there's so much opinion to spirituality, and and I think that's what gets so many people in trouble with each other, because we all have to leave judgment up to God's hands, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that when we were created, we lived a lot longer than we do now, but our bodies are only designed to live so long.
Right.
And they're not, since sin entered the world through Adam, we lost that ability to live forever. So, but I think over time, we've just kind of depleted our ability for longevity. So I don't think it's God's choice to decide or determine illness, especially dementia. If that were the case, I know my pastor would still be alive from our church. I think it's more our own bodies, and maybe even the sin in our bodies that kind of deplete our longevity. So it's just everything wears out, and we can't unfortunately replace a brain like we can replace a knee. So there's certain things that we can fix easily with medical science, with modern medical advancement, but this is just one thing, the brain, we're never going to be able to get beyond that. So it's just one of those things that wears out like everything else in the body.
Exactly. And Joyce asked, just like mental issues aren't necessarily spiritual issues. I personally feel like a lot of mental issues with women, I know even in my case, I don't have like mental issues, but I'm just talking about anxiety, different things like that, postpartum, depression, I believe is related to hormones. So, I do think that like sin in your life can cause consequences such as battling with guilt and, depression and different things like that. But I don't know. And what do you think too? I feel like we live in such a toxic world. And, like Nicole said, heavy metal poisoning. I've even heard that like aluminum is, just even aluminum in aluminum pans is linked to Alzheimer's. And that's why you need to use cast iron instead of aluminum, and different things like that. So,
or in the water,
the water. I know we live on well water, thank goodness. So we don't have any of the like the fluoride or anything bad in our water. But do you think that even just this, just being filled with chemicals in the world can play into stuff like that?
I think that that's not so much an influencing factor to the generation that we're talking about right now, but it'll be interesting to see how it influences the younger generation. I mean, this is way off topic, but just the fact that they're putting so much hormones in animals that a byproduct is it's affecting the hormones of our children. Like men are having lower testosterone and more estrogen because of the estrogen hormones that they're putting in chicken to make them more busty
Right. Plump breast.
in the meat department.
Mm-hmm.
So those chemical byproducts are certainly going to, and have already started influencing the younger generations. You know, we have a demasculinization of men
Right.
as a result of that, and then societal acceptance, because they're like, well, we're not going to change our chicken ways, so we're just going to propagandize everything to make it okay. So that's definitely going to be a factor in the younger generations, and who knows what ailments they're going to come to once they reach their 80s.
Oh yeah.
But none of them are going to have children, so they're all going to be the government's problem at that point, because
That is a good observation. That's a scary observation. Even I believe just when you guys know how I stand on the COVID vax, but even just the fallout from all these different, experimental vaccines that they're pushing on the population. I mean, as they've done studies with the COVID, most women are sterile for at least 6 months.
That's scary.
Yeah.
Well, in COVID, the vaccine's not even a vaccine. Like, it's just a preventative. It's not even, come here. It's not even a vaccine to stop COVID. It just prevents it. So I know it's kind of misinformation. I'll give him to you if he starts to act up. It's just misinformation that they're spraying, like, oh, get the vaccine. Like, everybody thinks they'll get this vaccine and they'll not have COVID. You know, they'll never get COVID, and that's not the case. It's like a preventative measure. But I've been around COVID since it started, since its inception, and I've not had any I've not gotten it, so, and I've not gotten vaccinated. They've not required us in the medical field to do that yet, but
I'm surprised. No, we got it. Our whole church got it, but we're all still kicking. So we're fine. We're fine.
You mean you all got COVID? You didn't all get vaccinated?
No, we did not all get vaccinated.
Yeah. Just for your audience's sake, I want to declare.
You know where we stand on that. No, we all got COVID, and it was for the babies. It was about like a cold. So some of the older people got it a little worse. I'm saying older, like my age, up to 60. In that age. So.
Interestingly, though, something they're not talking about is how there's a long-term side effect of after recovery of COVID. And I don't know if you see it with any of your congregation, but there's ongoing issues with fatigue and depression, like a loss of interest in activities. People just don't have the energy. They just want to sleep a lot more. They don't have the energy to do anything. And this is after recovering from COVID. And or they might even have respiratory issues where they feel like they can't catch their breath. They don't have the energy they used to have. And this is things that can last upwards to a year after recovery.
That's interesting. No, the only thing I've noticed is that we never got a single thing during COVID, our entire church, like during that year, 2020. None of us got anything. 2021 hit right about the time they started rolling out the vax. And all of a sudden, well, we got it from, I don't know, it went through the whole church. But then we keep getting colds, like every month, every 2 months. We're like continually getting this cold and passing it around everyone in church. And for the babies, the second cold was actually worse than when we had the actual COVID. And that cough turned into bronchitis for a couple of the little ones. I don't know. It's really weird. I wonder if it has something to do with shedding. They say it doesn't shed, but I don't believe that. The shedding of all this. I mean, what, 50% of Americans are vaccinated now, something like that. So I don't know. I just say it's building their immunities, and I'm wondering if this is going to be a way of life. Now that they're pushing these vaccines so hard.
So don't say that. I think normalcy is a thing of the past, unfortunately.
Yeah, I do too. Unfortunately. So. But yeah, I love these thoughts. Ladies, if you have any other questions, I'm keeping an eye on the live chat. So go ahead and leave a question. I like the questions about dementia. Do you have any closing thoughts, though, when it comes to, just those roles being reversed and having to decide, what steps you're taking with your parents?
Well, I think it's it's a thing that you have to really sit down and think through. But if you're conflicted on how to proceed, you can always look back to the Bible. I mean, the Bible gives us answers and everything. And
Right.
I mean, Ruth is a great example of
Mhm.
taking ownership and responsibility of those that cared for you. That wasn't even her mother, but she
Right.
felt responsible and gave up so much of herself to care for this woman that she respected. So
Mhm.
that I think is, I mean, the answers are always in the book if you know where to look, and this is no exception.
Right. Someone asked, I know this might be a loaded question, I don't even know if you could touch on it, but Nicole asked tips on estate planning. How do you work with an older person who hasn't done any of that?
Estate planning. Well, my advice is to let them give it all away before they die.
Well,
Honestly, especially, I know nobody wants to do that, but especially if they're like, if you're a power of attorney for your mom, for example, your dad's passed, mom's the only one left, she's moving in with you, like, sell the house,
right.
liquidate everything and give it away, because if you wait till she dies, it all goes under inheritance tax and they take 10 to 30%.
Wow.
Better off just giving it while she's still alive, because then they don't take anything. You
Right.
don't have to claim it as a gift, so you don't have to claim it as an income.
That's true.
Otherwise, it all goes through taxation, which is such a stinking annoyance to me, because this is double taxed in my opinion.
Right.
I'm libertarian,
Well,
but
mine
like,
too.
I mean, it's their income that got taxed when they got it, and now they're getting it taxed again because they didn't spend it. It's just not right. It's not right, but that's how the reality of the situation. But I know a lot of people don't want to do that. They're like, oh, I want to leave something when I die, so that, and so it's important, I think, more than anything, that their wishes are respected as far as funeral services. So even if they don't want to estate plan, usually if they don't estate plan, inheritance will go to the spouse,
Mhm.
everything, if there's no will. If the spouse isn't involved, it's usually divided equally amongst the next of kin, which is siblings,
Okay.
unless brother or sister wants to stake a claim, because I think they're on same tier as siblings. So
Mhm.
if you have a good cohesive family or a small family where everyone's already passed, it doesn't much matter. But if there's a larger family, like the situation with my grandmother is, she lives in a farmhouse that has been in the family for over 100 years.
Mhm.
And all of her children already have homes, are established.
Right.
Um, they want, when she passes, to equally divide the assets of the estate, but they don't want to sell the estate. Like, they would rather somebody, buy the farm out, right? But all the children aren't going to want to do it, so it falls on the grandchildren, and the farm's probably valued at like $500,000. I
Mhm.
don't have that. I
Right.
doubt any of my cousins do. So they're going to want to liquidate this estate, but they can't keep it in the family if they do that. So it's like, these sort of things are going to come up, and it's something
Yeah.
that's good to have a conversation about, maybe not with mom, but with brother and sister, to say,
Right.
okay, if she doesn't have much longer to live, where are we at as far as her home? More
Mhm.
so than the money. The money is easily just divided by 5 for whoever's around, just divide the number. But more so this stuff that isn't money, like guns is a
Mhm.
big thing, like with dad's guns. Everyone, especially if they're a hunting family, there's a special gun that this person wants, that person wants. Um, I don't know. They don't have a whole lot in possessions in that generation. They just, because they were kids in the Depression, so they weren't
Yeah.
really big on things. But the house is the big thing. Like, what's the plan with the house, especially if it's a house that's been in the family for years and years, or if it's just, maybe they already downsized and it doesn't matter. Then you just
Right.
liquidate it and divide it up. But it's good to have that conversation with them. And then the conversation you have with mom is, do you want cremated? Do you want buried? Is dad already buried? Are you going to have, is there a plot already in place? Or what happened with dad? That, what would you want the same thing to happen with you? Do you want an open casket? Do you want a service? These things kind of established beforehand, because so many times in hospice, we come into the home. I just had a death on Friday
Mhm.
where he asked his wife to get him a drink, and she came back with it, and he was dead.
Oh, man.
And they had just started on services the day before. They were in discussion about the funeral home, but they didn't know where to go. And it was 11 o'clock at night, and they didn't know what funeral home they wanted. So, I mean, you can make a decision at that point. Like, it's not like I would call a funeral home and they say, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have a service with them. Like, they didn't open an account with us, so we can't come get him. They'll come get him. So don't think that's going to happen. But it's better to know ahead of time before they pass what their wishes are, so you're not speculating or guessing. So that's the conversation you should have as far as estate planning with mom. And then the conversation to have with the siblings is the rest of it, like what to do with the financial aspects. Let that be up to you guys.
Very good tips. All right, one more question, and then we're
Sure.
out of here. Someone said, Ashley asked, for very end stage care, is it true that morphine will suppress breathing? I've heard when hospice starts pain control, it's a matter of days when a patient passes. If she's curious if that's true or not.
So we do not bring the kiss of death, but the kiss of death is available in the bottle in the home. So we do give morphine, basically.
Is that what morphine is called?
What?
Is that what morphine is called? What do you mean kiss of death?
Okay, let me explain. Morphine, we give you a liquid morphine because a lot of times when they're almost imminently dying, they can't swallow anymore. They're not even conscious. The last stages of death, I think we talked about this before, but the last stages before death, they're usually sleeping.
Yeah.
Like the entire day. They're not eating, they're not drinking, they're just sleeping. So if they're restless or in any type of physical pain, because at that point in time, sometimes just touching them is painful, that you can just squirt a little morphine in the mouth. We only have you give them like 5 milligrams of morphine at a time. It usually burns through the system in a matter of 4 hours at most. And so we are not telling you to over medicate to let them just, ease into sleep and not wake up. However, the bottle's sitting there. That's what I said. Like, there is a kiss of death. We don't promote it, but, and I don't know if I've ever had anyone, pull up that syringe and just, dump the whole thing in the mouth, but that would definitely end things. And if that happened, I wouldn't know. I really wouldn't know, be able to know. So, but yeah, morphine is not something that, if given properly, will speed up the dying process. But it helps with pain, and it does slow down respiration, but only we give it if they're in respiratory distress. So if they're having trouble breathing, if they're rapid breathing, it does relax the breathing component, but it won't stop you from,
but it doesn't suppress it.
Right.
Okay.
It just relaxes any constriction you have in the respiratory system, but it doesn't stop it. It just relaxes it. So it slows down the breathing a little bit.
I know from
I guess that is kind of the reputation. Like, we're just gonna kill them.
It kind of is like, and I feel like, I don't know, when my friend went on hospice that had stage 4 cancer, stage 4, does it go up to stage 4? It was the end. It was the end stage of cancer. She had to be on morphine, and she was pretty much sleeping most of the day. She had ice pops. Sometimes she wasn't eating or drinking. But she needed the morphine because she was in so much pain from the cancer just all throughout her body. And I think at that point it would have been torture, since she was close to dying, to just let her deal with it, not give her anything to help with the pain. So
yeah.
And
that's our focus in hospice, is to make sure they're not in pain, make sure they're comfortable. Like, we're not going to stop them from dying, but we just make sure it's the easiest death they could possibly have.
Right, because at that point. But I hate to end on such a depressing note.
I think it's fascinating personally. I think it's a privilege and an honor to be a part of somebody's life as they live those last moments, to be a part of that really intimate time with the family and to be a support to them. But just the whole, there's definitely spirituality in death, and seeing how the face changes, how the body changes, how they become almost like an alien person to you after the soul leaves the body. It's like they're not the same person anymore. It's really odd
I
like
know.
the look on their face changes and everything when they die. So I think it's fascinating stuff.
Right. Well, and if you're a Christian, you do believe in the afterlife, and you know that they're
Nothing to worry about. Yeah.
right,
And that's
exactly.
definitely been such a blessing for me, after becoming Christian, especially in, the world we live in. Nihilism is definitely a prominent feature in most of the younger generations. And I think the true answer to everything is God. And
Yes. Amen.
so
I agree. Well, thank you very much for coming on. I hope you guys got a lot from this. I'm always feel like Sarah does a great job of explaining things, and she's always fascinating when it comes to any subject we talk about, whether that's, hospice or mental health or anything like that. So I'm sure we will have you on again soon. So if you
absolutely,
guys have any
anytime.
questions for her, leave them down below. She will definitely answer your questions if they're there. So, otherwise we will see you guys next week. All right. So hang on, Sarah, and I'm going to go
Okay.
ahead and shut this off.